So hello and welcome to our Minds and Money 5 at 5 show, which today is sponsored by Enduro Metals and is brought to you in association with the Resource Global Network. This 5 at 5 show is part of our May Roadshow, which today runs from 8 AM to 8 PM East Coast time. For those of you attending 5 at 5 for the first time, the aim of 5 at 5, 5 guests at 5 PM through a different time zone each week, is to maintain engagement between investors and miners through a lively interactive format whilst we await the return of physical events. A few admin announcements before we start. To make it as interactive as possible, please have your videos switched on. And to ask a question, you have two options. You can either submit them via the chat function, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen, I'll just put hi there, so you can hopefully see where you can post your questions or post your comments or post your thoughts. Or you can go and click on the participants function, ask yourself to be unmuted. Either myself or my colleagues, Kelvin or Sinead, will unmute you, and you can ask your question live. We will also be having polling questions throughout the webinar where you can vote. Today's show is a very exciting show. It's all about the Golden Triangle. And to discuss the mining investment potential, I have a great lineup of guests. They are Cole Evans, Chief Executive Officer of Enduro Metals Corp, Michael Gray, Partner of Agentis Capital, Rudi Fronk, Chairman and CEO of Seabridge Gold, and Kendra Johnston, President and CEO of the Association of Mineral Exploration, AME. So I think that to go and start today's 5 at 5, perhaps we can start off with a polling question. Perhaps I can ask my colleague Kelvin to go and bring the polling question up onto the screen. Okay, I think we're having a problem with this sort of like we're having a problem with this sort of polling question. But whilst I just try to get that sorted out, perhaps I can just bring in Kendra Johnston from the AME first. For our viewers, perhaps can you just give us a brief history of the Golden Triangle? I understand that deposits were first discovered there back in 1861.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Happy to, Andrew, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you for 5 and 5. Yeah, so there's actually a really long history of the Golden Triangle. It goes well beyond 1861. So some of the local First Nations that lived in the area and long before Canada really ever existed, and nations have been mining up in that jurisdiction for a long, long time, and most notably, most likely, the key mineral would have been obsidian, used for making of quartz. Our modern day sort of history of the gold rush in that area, though, did begin in 1861 with the discovery of at the headwaters of the Sakine and the Anuk rivers. And there were about 800 prospectors that left from Victoria to go up to that area and take part in the gold rush up there. And then if we look at some of the very well-known projects up in the Golden Triangle today, some do have a very, very long history. You look at the Premier Gold Mine, it was one of the first projects, one of the first mines put into production in the Golden Triangle, and it was put into operations in 1918, so approximately 55-ish years after gold was discovered in the Golden Triangle area. Some of the others, of course, very well known, the Snip mine, first discovered in 1964 by Cominco, a very well-known company at the time, and still around today in a different iteration, but still around. And then perhaps more recently, one of the more exciting discoveries in 1988, was SK Creek, with quite a phenomenal drill hole. It was 27 grams of gold and 30 grams of silver over 208 meters. So quite an exciting hit at the time, and really started a bit of a rush at that point in time. And then if we look today at some of the activity, we really haven't seen a situation like this, or an environment that we have like this in the Golden Triangle in a very, very long time. So always been a prolific area, but certainly an exciting time to be working up in the Golden Triangle today.
Mm-hmm. And bringing in Michael Gray from Agentis Capital, until recently, a lot of the potential was untapped. What's changed?
Well, thanks, Andrew. And I'm a geologist by background. For context, and I'm an analyst. Well, part of it's what's not changed. The attractive geology hasn't changed. That's always been there. But one of the key things is the infrastructure. The fact that the Highway 37 power line came into the Golden Triangle kind of opened up the potential, reduced the cost for power, and made all sorts of opportunities available for mining companies. So that was one really key thing. The other thing was about a decade ago, the BC government started sharing the mineral tax credit, the BC mineral tax credit, with the First Nations. All of a sudden, the First Nations in the Golden Triangle in particular started to embrace mineral exploration and development. They were getting a cut of the revenues, which was really key. And there has been really good policy from various stripes of government over the last 20 years when it comes to BC land use, in particular in the Golden Triangle. So that's been really key to unlocking a lot of the activity and potential.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess as an investor, what sort of like attracts you to the Golden Triangle? You know, you talked about the improved infrastructure, but is like anything else that sort of particularly attracts you?
Yeah, I mean, on a global basis, it's got very special geology. It's got a slice of geology, without getting too technical, it's about 200 million years old. And it's very similar to what you see in Indonesia and the Philippines. So you have a magmatic arc near a plate boundary, and it's cored by a tremendous volume of granites, to make it simple. So on a global basis, you have this attractive geology that's yielded very high grade deposits, including SK that Kendra mentioned, 45 grams per ton average grade, over 2 kilograms silver, so gold and silver grades, you know, making it very special. And tier 1 type of sizes of deposits, ones that would attract the senior mining companies. And that's exactly what has happened in the last 5 years, in particular with Newmont, Teck, Galore Creek, Newcrest coming into Red Chris, and then most recently GT Gold being bought by Newmont. And as part of this, when Sandeep Biswas of Newcrest announced their acquisition of 70% of Red Chris, he said on the conference call to analysts that BC is a tier 1 jurisdiction. And that's the first time probably that phrase was used for BC in decades. So BC has really transformed, in particular, the Golden Triangle as a global hub.
Mm-hmm. Kendra, Michael sort of like mentioned that one thing that has been done is obviously bringing in the First Nations and bringing the First Nations on board. Are there any sort of outstanding challenges with regards to the First Nations? And if so, how is the Golden Triangle addressing these?
Yeah, so the Golden Triangle, I would say, is actually out ahead of many of the First Nation concerns. The companies who are working in that area are working extremely well with the local First Nations. There are always challenges. There's different points of view. There's different understandings of different pieces and parcels of land, and different opinions on how projects should advance. So those kinds of questions that are challenging conversations are always happening, and they should be happening. That's a sign of a really strong and healthy relationship and a strong engagement process. But the Golden Triangle is really leading the charge in some of the new pathways forward, I guess, and some of the new agreements that are being put in place, the communication agreements. You know, Mike talked about the revenue sharing piece of it. That's a really important piece of the puzzle that happens right across the province. But the two primary nations up in the Golden Triangle are the Tahltan and the Nisga'a, and they are both very forward-thinking. Nisga'a has a settled treaty, so there's a little bit more of an understanding of how projects are going to advance, and you know, certainty of when a project is, when the Nisga'a sort of agree to a project, that it will move forward, that it will in fact move forward. And the Tahltan have so many projects within their territory that they are really quite comfortable with the process and how projects progress. They also have an extraordinary amount of depth and knowledge, and First Nation members from their community who are trained geologists and mine engineers, and you know, understand the permitting process quite thoroughly. So it's a really neat place to work, and a really forward-thinking area that is, I dare say, pushing the envelope in the direction that we need it to go in to advance projects across the province.
Mm-hmm. So then, and just a quick like follow-up question on that, Kendra, can you just talk a little bit about AME's work with the sort of like First Nations?
Sure. So we work with First Nations across the province, but specifically in the Northwest. We are the project administrator for a group called the BC Regional Mining Alliance, which is a group, an alliance, really, of provincial government, First Nations, and industry partners, working up in the Golden Triangle at this point, and hopefully at some point we will expand across the province. But right now we're really focused on the Golden Triangle and trying to set a pathway forward and a level of understanding of how these conversations happen, how reconciliation happens, and it's really a three-way conversation with a variety of two-way conversations. So there's a government-to-government conversation between First Nations governments and provincial governments. There's a company to First Nation conversation that happens, and then a company to provincial government conversation that happens. So here at AME, we're really involved in facilitating those conversations and trying to promote the work that is going on in the Golden Triangle.
So, Michael, so just to like summarize for our listeners, what is the size of the opportunity we're talking here? So, if all the plans for Golden Triangle's mines come to fruition over the next sort of 20 years or so, what are we talking in terms of production ounces? What sort of returns do you think investors can expect?
Yeah, I don't know if I can comment specifically on returns, because that's certainly going to depend on the metal price tailwinds that hopefully we continue to experience. But maybe to give you a perspective, from 1980 to 2020, in the Golden Triangle, it was only 6 million ounces of gold produced, 440 million pounds of copper, 166 million ounces of silver, for just under 10 million ounces gold equivalent. What we project between 2021 and 2040, so the next 20 years, is about double that gold production, towards 11 million ounces, copper about 2.3 billion, and silver about 111 million ounces of production. And this is partly folding in some of the companies we cover that we project to be in production within that time period, including GT Gold, Ascot, and Seabridge. And that's not even including Rudi's Seabridge project that could double that gold production and get close to double the copper production. So in terms of endowment, but sitting on the sidelines, 200 million ounces of gold, much of which Rudi has in his portfolio, 1.2 billion ounces of silver, 55 plus billion ounces of copper. It's the very early innings in the Golden Triangle from our perspective.
I'd just add to that as well, it also doesn't take into account all of the really early stage junior exploration work that's happening out there and the potential of a brand new discovery, which is an exciting opportunity as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for that excellent sort of summary about the Golden Triangle. We're already getting a few questions sent in the chat box function that I'll definitely make sure we ask during the course of the next sort of 45 minutes or so. But without further ado, I'd like to move on to our first mining update of the show. Enduro Metals holds one of the largest junior land positions in the heart of British Columbia's Golden Triangle, and Cole Evans is their CEO. I think we're just going to be bringing his slides up on the screen now. So as soon as we have the slides up, Cole, I'll hand over to you. The floor is yours, Cole.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. And thanks for putting this event together. We were joking beforehand that the most difficult thing I had to do this week was summarize Enduro Metals into 3 or 4 slides. So hopefully we can do it here. But yeah, as Andrew mentioned, we are a junior explorer right up in the Golden Triangle, southeast of Galore Creek, northwest of KSM, Rudi's project. If you could just go to the next slide, please. Or do I have control of this? No, there we go. Forward-looking statements. Yeah, this gives people a little bit of an overview. This is something that we like to call the pizza theory. But you can break the Golden Triangle down into there's 5 mineralizing events, as Mike was discussing. One of the most well-endowed mineral districts in the world, and we've got a significant slice of it that we look at as being, in a quantitative way, vastly unexplored relative to the rest of it. If you go to the next slide, please. look at the property outline. So this is where I cheated a little bit on my last slide. There's a few other things. So that's a look at our project ourselves. As you can see, there's the projects around us, and on the infrastructure, we have road touching the project now to the north and the south, along with a near $2 billion hydroelectric power facility. We break it down into four main things. When you have a project of this size, there's hundreds of mineral occurrences. There's no way we could possibly talk about them all, but there's 4 like systems. And what we're focused on for 2021 is what we feel the real prize is, and that's the copper gold porphyry systems. We have 5 of those targets that exist to date. Here's some of the highlights on a few of them that we're going to be looking at in 2021. And the drilling season starts in a few weeks here, so I'm more or less just excited to get through all these conferences and get out into the middle of nowhere, to be quite honest. But happy to talk about it until then.
Okay.
Nicole, just chiming in here. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe the glacial retreat may or may not have impacted and exhumed certain showings and discoveries that wouldn't have been there 20 years ago, 40 years ago? Yeah, that's a really good point, Michael. So in the glaciation, particularly in Newmont Lake, and to be quite honest, this was like I've told other people before, a bit of a the glaciation was a story that I wasn't quite buying at first until the last couple of years when we've been up here and we're on what's on the edge of what's called the Andre ice sheet. And we were able to go back into the old government data from the 1980s, like when Kendra was mentioning during the discovery of Esque, and trace the actual glacial retreat in this area. And it's kilometers in scale. And it's over top of some of our best targets. The one number we had up there, 37 meters, 1.3% copper, 1.5 grams gold, 23 grams silver, and nearly 3% zinc. That's right on surface. That's never been drilled in human history, and probably was not visible to anybody until the last few years. It's been under ice for 20,000 years. So yeah, we're really fortunate to be the first people to have a look at a lot of these things and get that first opportunity to discover something new.
Maybe touch a little bit on your plans for this season as well, and in terms of drilling and the work that you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't released exactly what we're going to do quite yet, but that should be out in the next week or two here. But we're committed. It's a drill focused season. 10,000 meters over various targets we're be committed to. We're fully funded for what we need to do. And as I mentioned before, it's about getting into what we feel the true prizes at Newmont Lake, and that's these copper gold porphyry systems. We've already seen evidence in arguably intersected pieces of them of various styles. In 2021 is about getting into the center of it. Sorry to kind of backpedal that question. I wish I could answer it a bit better, but we could do.
There's a question that's been sent in from the audience. Cole, when are you going to be on site, and with how many drill rigs?
Yeah, good question. That's Mother Nature's the ultimate decider of that. Snow for the Golden Triangle area in general has been a bit of an issue to start this season. The snowpack in the last government report was about 131% of average. But with that, the weather has been helping us out. So hopefully we'll be on site within the next few weeks. There'll be an announcement when we do, but that's all snow dependent. And we've actually just helped start a tall tand owned diamond drilling company with some of a group of people that we've been working with up there for many years. We consider some of the best in the business. So we feel confident that they'll actually be able to get those 10,000 meters done with one drill, which we've done with them before. They've actually done even better than that. They've done 12,000 meters with one drill in 4 months. So pretty impressive for a fly job. It's all about having the right people.
Okay. There's another question being sent in by the audience. What percentage of the property still has ice on it?
Oh, good question. I haven't thought about it in a percentage perspective. This is a guesstimation, maybe 15%, something around there. 3 of our 4 targets are, more or less ice-free, or ice not being a significant issue at this point. Ice, permanent snow. Burgundy, that one has significantly more ice and snow cover. But again, that's where I look at it as that's where lots of the opportunity lays.
Okay. Question from me. Can you talk about who your main shareholders are? I think I saw on your website or press release that Rob McEwen was one of your main shareholders?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very fortunate to have support. Rob McEwen's our second largest shareholder. I'm the largest shareholder of the company. I've invested about 2.5 million Canadian, roughly. I'm buying more shares as the days go on, if you check so. So that number's changing. But yeah, I'm the largest shareholder of the company, and we're very fortunate to have the backing of Rob McEwen in the multi-month vetting process that you go through to get him on board. So.
Okay. Any more questions from yourself, Michael, or Kendra?
Well, maybe just Cole, can you comment on how closely the senior mining companies are watching you and your activities?
Yeah, I mean, just keeping everybody's interest and confidence. The Golden Triangle in general, and when you're one of the largest junior landholders in the Golden Triangle, as you were discussing before, they consider this to be a tier 1 district. And when you have what I consider to be a tier 1 scale project with tier 1 scale targets, people are quite interested, particularly in the copper. Over the last 18 months, we've been more so focused on the near surface high grade gold, the easy picking, so to speak. But we believe that's all part of, as you see in these type of geological environments, part of a broader system that is the copper and gold porphyry. So with that focus in 2021, I think you could be potentially seeing them start to step forward. But I don't want to create any unnecessary speculation at this point.
Cool. Maybe I'll take you in a little bit of a different direction, if you don't mind. You made a comment that you were really excited to get up there into the middle of nowhere. Very true. It's in some respects, it's the middle of nowhere, but you also are going up there in the middle of a COVID environment, and that brings a whole bunch of new health and safety protocols, and you've got a local community as well as a relatively large camp up there. So what does that mean for your summer programs, and what kind of expense does that put onto a project?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kendra. Particularly in Canada, where compared to the United States, we've had a bit of a lag in the vaccination accessibility. It has been a major, one of the largest points of concerns in preparation going into the season. One of the most important things is getting people vaccinated for our employees as they can be. And the second thing is testing. So I know actually Rudi as a company is one of a few that have really taken the lead here in setting up stations for the 15-minute quick testing for everybody prior to entering camp in a number of stations throughout the Golden Triangle, as well as staying isolated is critical. And then communicating with the local community. As you mentioned, we work in particularly closely with the Tahltan central government. We're within the Tahltan traditional territory, our project nearly 100%. So it's literally daily or a very regular basis communication with what we're doing, what they want to see us do, and ultimately everybody works together to make it work.
Okay. And then just a final question from the audience, which is actually for all of our panelists, but I'm going to direct it to you first, Cole, and then invite any of the other panelists to go and comment. Can the panel please comment on issues around accessibility in the Golden Triangle area, particularly seasonality and altitude, helicopter-only access in some cases? So to you first, Cole, and then to any of our other three panelists.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Undoubtedly, it's this is not Kansas. This is not an easy place to work by any means. But I also I look at it from the perspective of we say the Golden Triangle. We're talking about a massive area, and it's not all the same. The mountains are not all the same. The valleys are not all the same. The snow cover is not all the same. Ice, however you want to put it. And so you really got to dive down into each individual project's accessibility. Of course, I'm going to have to put in a plug for Enduro with that. That's one of the fortunate things about our location, not only with respect to the infrastructure developments by others around us, but your access, you have these flat U-shaped valleys that are behind much of this snow shadow. So it makes it easier than one might think, though I'm not saying it's easy by any means. And the second side of it is you need to be creative. It's so easy, particularly for major mining companies who have large budgets, to go with the default route of helicopters and all of these expensive programs, when in reality, if you put a bit of creativity and pre-planning into it, there's a lot of ways that you can work around that, whether it be, using snow to your advantage. Look at Bruce Jack as a perfect example. There's a year-round 13-kilometer ice road that goes up a valley glacier to get to the mine. Like it's incredible, right? And so it's you just got to work with nature and be creative, and there's always solutions.
Okay. Does any of our other panelists wish to comment or comment on that question, or have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add something there. Rudi, Fronk here from Seabridge, and we bought our KSM project in the year 2000. One of the reasons that Plasterdome got out of it was logistically challenged in terms of access to the project. You look at the area now, and the government of Canada and British Columbia spent over $700 million bringing power to the district along a transmission line that's sourced mostly by hydro. As a participant, the Golden Triangle, we have access to some of the cheapest power in the world, about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. We also have major road network now, a Highway 37 year-round paved highway that goes right through the heart of the Golden Triangle. And just more recently, we now have 2 ports available to us in the town of Stewart that gives all of us access to the Pacific Rim to bring concentrate out or supplies in. So logistically, it has improved dramatically since the 22 years we've been involved in the Golden Triangle.
Yeah, I might just add to that as well. We've also just in the last month or so heard about upgrades to the local Dease Lake Airport, which is a really exciting piece. It means that we're going to be able to take flights after dusk in and out of that airport, and increase the health and safety of the area. But if you look at it in a bit of a larger scope, we live in Canada, where there's a vast amount of exploration that happens in the north as well, and many of those areas are far more remote and have the seasonality, and in many cases far more challenging seasonality. You look at some of the swampy areas out in Ontario that are very difficult to work in. So every region has its challenges, and there's really a lot of very positive things going on for the Golden Triangle in terms of access.
I would just add too that there is a real rain shadow in the far east of the Golden Triangle. As you get to Red Chris, there's only about a meter plus minus of snow per year, whereas the rest of the Golden Triangle experiences much more snow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very, very much for that. I think in the interest of time, we need to move on to our next mining update. Cole, you will see in the chat box, I think there was one question from, I think it was Tom, one of our listeners, we weren't able to get around to answering. Perhaps I can ask you just to answer that question in the chat box too, Tom.
No problem.
But then if we can perhaps just move on to our next mining update. You heard from him just briefly before there. He is Rudi Fronk, who's President and Chief Executive Officer of Seabridge Gold. And Seabridge Gold's resource base of gold, copper and silver is one of the world's largest. Over to you, Rudi.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for Mines and Money for including us in this panel here today. Yeah, we've been very fortunate in the Golden Triangle. We have amassed a large land holding, not just at KSM, but also at the Iskut property. You can go to the next slide quick, which is my obligatory forward-looking statement. Okay, so just a little bit of background on Seabridge, because we're a bit unique in terms of our business structure and business plan here. My colleagues and I took over a shell in 1999 with the view that the price of gold was going to go substantially higher. And our goal was to create what we thought would be the industry's best leverage to a rising gold price by building a company that provides more ounces of gold in the ground per common share than any other company on the planet. And what helped us, obviously, a big way in terms of achieving this objective was the success we did have at KSM. In fact, if you go looking at the end of 2020, we had about 75 million shares outstanding, but we had almost 160 million ounces of gold resources in all categories, including 45 million ounces of reserves, meaning that each one of our shares was backed by over 2 ounces of gold per common share. And this does not include the 50 billion pounds of copper or 700 million ounces of silver we also have in resources and reserves. Next slide. And what that has done is what we were hoping to show outperformance in a market when the gold price is going higher. In fact, our shares have probably outperformed every other gold stock over the past 22 years and the gold price itself by a meaningful way. The takeaway from this, from my perspective, is I am a gold bug. I'll be the first to admit that. I think the price of gold is going to go substantially higher from here, just as a result of what central banks are doing with their fiat currencies. And if gold is going higher, we have a 22-year track record of showing significant outperformance, and our shares should do just well. Next slide. And we always talk about our gold. What people forget a lot about, though, is our copper. We're very fortunate that at KSM, we have found over 50 billion pounds of copper over the past 20 years. In fact, if you look at our copper pounds per share, we provide more copper ownership per share than any of the big copper companies or any of the big gold companies that actually produce copper as a byproduct. So it's not just about gold, it's about copper. Next slide. So going specifically to KSM, we now have 5 deposits at KSM, which collectively give us 9.8 billion tons of total resources that are either confined by open pits or blockades. And other attributes to this project. We've also taken this project successfully through the environmental assessment process. One of the few projects in the Golden Triangle that actually is construction ready, shovel ready. But we also have a lot of flexibility. The 5 deposits we have at varying levels of gold versus copper. If you want to concentrate on copper, go after Iron Cap and Kerr. If you want to concentrate more on gold on a per ton metric, go for the open pits at Mitchell, Snowfield, and Sulphurets. Also, we've successfully taken this project through the review and support of the local indigenous groups. Kendra talked about the Niska Nation, the Tahltan Nation. We have signed impact benefit agreements in place with both of them, and we work very closely together going forward. And then last but not least are the economics. If you look at this project today, we can show mine plans that have all-in cost of production, including the upfront capital of $500 an ounce or lower, using a $3 copper price as a byproduct credit. So I think, Andrew, I tried to keep my remarks short, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, that was an absolutely fantastic summary. I think, as I was saying to you before the show, I really do love this kind of like gold in the ground ECS strategy that you have. It seems to be very, very unique strategy that Seabridge have. Can I first of all bring in our 2 guests, Kendra and Michael? Kendra and Michael, do you have any questions for Rudi?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Rudi, Michael talked at the beginning of the session about BC being a tier 1 jurisdiction, and a big part of that is really our permitting process and the thoroughness of it, and the regulations that are involved in that. And having gone through that EA process, just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the process and what that means in terms of certainty to be able to develop, and what the timelines are from here now that you have that certificate.
Well, there is a process in place in BC. I will tell you it's long and it's expensive. There's no getting around that. I mean, we started our first dialogue with the First Nations in 2008, and it wasn't until 2014 when we received our provincial and federal approvals. So it took a long time and took a lot of money to get there. But at the same time, it gave us the chance to work with the First Nations to show them what this project would mean to their communities, not just for the next 10 or 20 years, but for the next perhaps 100 years. So that was a big benefit for us. But having a process and a timeline and steps that have to be taken well defined. I've permitted mines in other jurisdictions around the world, and BC, in my view, is as good as it gets.
Maybe just picking up on the permitting side, Rudi, what was the key with the First Nations? I mean, it's a large, somewhat complex project with lots of topography and moving parts, but I was actually surprised that you got through the process a number of years ago as quickly as you did on the First Nations side of it. Are there some keys to those negotiations and how you manage expectations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we did. Number one, First Nations love to see a project that could be multi-generational to keep their youth in the communities with good paying jobs. A lot of mining projects out there only go for 10 or 15 years. The mine shuts down and you leave a mess behind in a lot of cases. This is a project that with 9.8 billion tons at 170,000 tons a day, we can show a 100-year mine life. Right now, we're only permitted for 2.4 billion tons of tailings, but the First Nations like to see that this actually can go beyond the next 30 or 40 years that we have in our mine plans right now. Then I think another big thing that helped us tremendously is the water flow that's coming out of the KSM Valley now is running over exposed porphyries. It's picking up a lot of heavy metals. It's very acidic, and it's going into waterways that actually, there's salmon fishing going on there. By putting a mine there, and the EPA actually stood up and said this at a meeting we had in Ketchikan, Alaska, saying that you guys want this mine built here because whatever the mine, when it's built, they're going to have to treat anything they touch. And as a result of the mine, the water quality will improve from what's coming out of there naturally today. I think that was also a big help for us.
No, fair enough. And you've spoken in the past about potentially syndicating the project, given the CapEx requirements. Any kind of update on that front, especially with the metal price environment we're in right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've said for many years now, this is a project that's well beyond our capabilities. Even with the market cap today pushing $2 billion, it's too big for us to develop on our own. And we've been talking joint venture with potential partners now for many years. We actually have turned down a number of proposals over the years. Our challenge has been is that, number one, up until recently, the market environment was not that great. The big companies were more inward looking than outward looking. Now, as a result, though, of higher metal prices and also strong cash flows being generated by these big companies, I think that our stars are finally aligning. And I'm very confident that we will get a deal done with the right partner under the right terms in the not too distant future. So the market environment has improved. And as a result, we've also continued to de-risk and improve the quality of the asset through engineering and exploration activities.
Is the recent investment in Western Copper and Gold by Rio, is that a bit of a signal to the market that there aren't very many projects of scale on the planet?
I think that's another big benefit. It's just the scarcity factor, Michael, as you're well aware of. There just aren't a lot of big projects out there for the big companies to go after. And the fact is they're running out of reserves, both on the gold side and the copper side. And if you look at copper's future as a result of the new green initiatives that are being put in place in globally, I mean, copper is going to be a very important metal to be mined, and we're just not making enough of it today.
I agree.
So you touched a little bit, Rudi, on of course the development of the project and potential sale and the path forward for the deposits that you have there. Do you also have a variety of exploration targets that you're still looking at and still exploring, or do you have other things in mind that are intriguing to you in the Golden Triangle?
Well, our guys are convinced there's 2 more porphyries on our deposit that are deeper, but adding tons beyond 9.8 billion won't move the needle that much. So our focus has been on let's work on the deposits we have now. If someone wants to go after additional exploration beyond that, once the partnership is in place, that's fine. But we have enough on our plate. Where we are focusing our exploration is, we took advantage of the down markets in 1999, buying KSM. In 2015, the market got beat up pretty badly as well. And we've now done 3 other acquisitions since then, earlier stage projects, one of which is in the Golden Triangle, Iskit, where we see a lot of similarities to what we were able to find at KSM, similar to what we expect to find at Iskit, which is only about 40 kilometers away from KSM.
But,
yeah, that's great potential out there.
Rudi, and just on, the Golden Triangle in particular is going to go through a block cave phase here at Redcrest, providing a positive feasibility at Redcrest vis-a-vis Newcrest driving that, and presumably, ultimately, Newmont at GT Gold Saddle North. Maybe you could just discuss a little bit about the block cave optionality and what that dynamic means for you up at KSM.
Yeah, great question, Michael. I mean, block caving is, in my view, the future of mining, but unfortunately, very few companies have that expertise in place today. And that was a challenge for us at KSM, because even if you looked at our pre-feasibility study that the project was permitted on, you'd have to start the block cave development before year 10 of production to start getting those caves into operation quicker. One of the reasons we chose to go out and acquire Snowfield last December from Pretium was we believe we can now show a project that can actually be open pit mining for 30 plus years, increasing the reserves we have today, not sacrificing any copper, which gives the big mining companies a lot more time and leeway to develop the caves in a shorter period of time. There's very few companies on the planet. On the gold side, there's probably just Newcrest that really have hands-on experience in block caving. On the base metal side, you know, Freeport is probably the best block caver out there. They've been block caving for 30 years. But block caving is not an easy task, and most companies don't have that expertise in-house. By bringing snowfields in, we're now going to do an updated pre-feas that'll actually show a different potential mine plan that takes some of the pressure off on block caving.
Yeah.
I'll maybe just follow up on that question. Vancouver, well, I guess British Columbia in general has long been promoted and discussed as a center of excellence for everything from geology through to finance and legal and accounting services, and really the whole package that you need to be able to push a mine forward. And Michael and I have had this conversation in the last few weeks where we're really seeing a bit of an influx from and an influence from Australia over the last little while. A little bit related to the block cave situation at Newcrest, a little bit related to some of the new theories that are being put forward. But are you seeing any of that influence, and is it having any influence on your project at all?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we talk with a lot of the block cavers out there looking at the opportunity here at KSM. You know, we are fortunate that the two deposits that are earmarked for block caves are large, high-grade copper relative to the gold. And can be mined in large tonnages. You know, the question is getting the right partner in that knows how to build a block cave and can develop a block cave that can pull 80 to 100,000 tons a day from a cave. It's a challenge, but it is the future of mining, because the less disturbance you can show on the surface in terms of waste rock storage and big open pits, I think the easier it's going to be to get projects permitted, because it is getting more challenging over time to get these big projects permitted and through an environmental approval process.
And actually, I'm definitely seeing that on my side of the government trying to get a handle really on what block caving means and the effect that that's going to have on permitting going forward. So I think it's a space to watch.
Yeah, one of the nice things about a block cave for us is, you know, we talk about we're permitted now for our tailings capacity of 2.4 billion tons. We have 9.8 billion tons of resources. Where are you going to put the additional 7 billion tons? And if you create big holes in the ground, either through big open pits or block caves, that's probably the best place to store future tailings beyond the 2.4 billion tons we have permitted.
If I can just like interject with a question, there's a question I meant to ask Cole earlier, but it slightly links into block caving and sort of technology innovation. I think on your website, Cole, you say that Enduro Metals are tech savvy. What do you mean by that? As in, what technology are you kind of using that's different from other companies?
Yeah, good question, Andrew. Well, exactly what we do, I don't really like to talk about it because I don't really want people to know exactly what we're doing, but the competitiveness about it. But no, you know, it's a wide variety of things. And I can't point to one thing in particular, but I think the importance of, you know, we found a number of techniques, whether it be in, you know, people like to talk about the hyperspectroscopy a bit, I think just because it's a big fancy word, but, you know, we haven't invented this technology by any means, but I think we found new and creative ways, working particularly with the companies who manufacture lots of the technology that we work with, in applying it at a scale that is doable for junior explorers. You know, using the hyperspec as an example, one of the biggest problems of it for junior explorers, one, the cost. Traditionally, you go through a core scanning process, which is expensive for a junior mining company to undertake. And the second thing is it creates a massive amount of data. And it ties into the importance of having the right people. If you do not have the right people, which most companies do not, to process that data, it becomes a big science project and frankly, a big waste of money. So I think one of our biggest competitive advantages is our ability to use new technology, mine data, as I always cheesily put it. The first gold mine is in the government data that we are so fortunate to have access to in British Columbia. But of equal importance is still going out. You cannot replace boots on the ground. You need to take this information that we can gather in the office, and you have to apply it boots on the ground in a real sense on the property in finding that balance can be difficult, but it's the most important thing.
There's a question that's been sent in by the audience. Cole, is your plan to repeat the success of Seabridge with finding several deposits and then waiting for majors to knock on your door?
Well, I am flattered to be compared to Seabridge, and I think if you read into their early story, as Rudi was alluding to in 99, 2000, when they first did the KSM deal, I encourage you to go look at that. He might be humble in his discussion there, but it's a pretty wild story. You know, comparing enduro metals to see, I have my own personal views. It's pretty difficult to compare yourself to, you know, one of the largest undeveloped gold projects in the world, right next door to you, from where we're at right now. Not that I don't feel that we can become that, but just it's a simply, yeah, when you're comparing to the best, you got to be careful in your statements. But yeah, a similar strategy in the sense of, you know, we I think are at a point where we've either found the hurricane of coincidences, or there's significant mineral deposits at Newmont Lake. And I'm of the latter theory, that we're onto significant mineral deposits at Newmont Lake, copper, gold, porphyries, and that, you know, we can be the next Seabridge-like company. But be very careful in my statements when comparing explicitly to it.
A question for both the mining companies, and I'll ask Rudi first and then Cole. How has COVID-19 impacted you? I'll go to Rudi first.
I mean, clearly it impacted the ability to get work done in the field last year. You know, not only we're dealing with COVID, but you need to respect the wishes of the First Nations in terms of, you know, not bringing people into their you know, areas that bring on the risk. So we did curtail a bit of our programs last year. We're now working closely with the First Nations, and as Cole mentioned, in terms of making sure we have proper testing in place. We expect to have a larger program this year, but you still need to be cognizant. I mean, let's face it, I live in the US where things are getting back to normal, not so much in Canada yet, and it looks like Canada's pretty far behind in terms of the ability to open up to back to a more normal environment. So it definitely impacts the amount of work you can get done in a specific season.
Mm-hmm. And for yourself, Cole?
Yeah, absolutely. As Rudi mentioned, it was a big hit to us in 2020, where we had a much shorter season than we otherwise would have liked to. But ultimately, as he mentioned, you have to respect the wishes of everybody and have everyone's health and safety as the first priority. Because ultimately, if you were to have some sort of COVID outbreak, or it really touches on health and safety in general, well, what was the point? Then there is no exploration. Then there is, you know, on the extreme end, like we said, with health and safety, then there's no company. It has to work for everybody, or there's no point in doing it. Going into 2021, I'm fortunate to tell everybody in 2 days here, I'm going to get my first shot, and I'm probably on the lowest end of the vaccine list here in Canada. So things are slowly coming together, but still this year we have to be very cautious in implementing our COVID-19 precautionary strategies that with the government and with the First Nations is follow it, and everyone will get through it just fine.
Sure. And then just one final question. This is open to any of the four panelists, whoever feels sort of best disposed to answer. I know we have had some problems with the labs, but when do you foresee the labs being back on track this year? Does anyone want to take a stab at answering that?
Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, we've thrown so much business over the years to the labs over the past decade that we tend to get pretty good turnaround, even when they may be short in terms of capabilities. So it really hasn't impacted Seabridge too much over the years. And, you know, at KSM, we don't have any exploration going on. At ISCID, we will, and we expect the same type of turnaround that we have received over the past decade from the labs we use.
I think it's a key question for investors to ask the companies, because I think there's going to be a lot of asymmetry. Talk to one company that says they're going to get 20-day turnaround, maybe similar to what Rudi's going to get. Other companies that were 4 months last year before they announced the results, that's a long time to wait when you have seasonal exploration in the Golden Triangle.
Yeah, I think generally speaking that's really good advice, and I I think what we're hearing is that the labs have caught up from last year. All the results are out now, which is great, but they've also had a little bit of a buffer time over the last month to 2, maybe 3 months to really figure out the process and the COVID processes specifically with internally, that some of the backlog that was related to those issues we shouldn't so much see this year. I think where the backlog is really going to happen is that it looks like we're primed for another really big season and a whole lot of exploration work happening. So, the backlogs are going to hit sort of halfway through the season, right through to the end of the season. And, the only way to really find that out, it's different for every company, is to really go and ask individually each one of the companies that you're investing in.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Kendra. And I'd maybe add to that too. There's been an investment in improving the process. So a lot of people, what happens when you're sending samples to a lab is, particularly if you're in the Golden Triangle, it goes to a prep facility first. The large backup isn't necessarily at the analytical lab. It's all it's preparing for your samples to get to the analytical lab. And I know the lab we work with, MSA Analytical, who had some issues with that earlier in 2020, has done a lot of work through the winter and has significantly increased their lab prep capacity. I think nearly triple what it was last year. So that, I think, will alleviate the biggest bottleneck in that process.
Okay, and I'm just going to sneak in one last quick question. It was addressed to you, Cole, but it's really open to anyone. Is it realistic to maybe use drones for some things as opposed to helicopters, Cole?
Yeah, definitely. You're never going to replace the helicopter. That's something I've actually been looking at quite a bit. There's some really cool innovations coming out of Germany right now on, I wouldn't call them drones or UAVs. They're essentially small electric helicopters. But yeah, there's already some things, but we use drones quite a bit for various different aerial surveys. You can do magnetics, radiometrics, even stuff getting as simple as high resolution imagery versus going with satellites. And one of the great things, particularly with the Golden Triangle, about doing that is with the weather and the cloud cover, the snow and things like that affect you seasonally. Doing aerial surveys via drone rather than using, say, a satellite is you're able to pinpoint the exact days and the exact weather that you want for those surveys, as opposed to if you're going and purchasing satellite imagery like you do on a lot of other projects. You can get a lot of interference because you're limited to a very small window of data that you can choose from. So the drones give us a lot of flexibility. It's cheaper once you can figure out how to do it well. And I think on the airborne geophysics side, it's already advancing and it's only going to get better.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of today's show. Absolutely fascinating show on the Golden Triangle. We'd certainly encourage everyone to go and check out the 2 companies that were presenting on today's show. All that remains for me to do is to go and thank today's guests, who were Cole Evans of Enduro Metals, Kendra Johnston of the AME, Michael Gray of Agentis Capital, and Rudi Fronk of Seabridge Gold. I'm Andrew Thake from Minds and Money. We do have a second show on Thursday this week at 5 p.m. Toronto time. Every cloud has a silver lining, featuring Kaya Silver, Wakana Resources, and Ignite Global. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.